Yo, what's up guys? In this video, I'm gonna explain you every single artifact line, how it works, when should you use it, what kind of unit should you be using it on. Because I noticed there's still a lot of people that don't really understand like crit damage first, crit damage on, maybe crit damage max, crit damage low. But for this video to be complete, I'm gonna use all of the lines that are currently in the game, including lines that are no longer being found, but are still in the game, might you have those artifacts. So let's start right off with damage on element. For this test, we will use a Molong. Molong is just damage on HP on the third skill, so 70% from its damage on HP. That's simply that. We don't have any artifacts right now. We're gonna check the damage, then add damage on water and see how much the damage increases. With the third skill, we currently do how much damage? Let's see. We do about 37.8. If we add in this artifact, that is just the only line that will be working on this is a damage on water. So that's damage on water 11. We have attack in there, so there's no scaling from that. So we should be doing around like 41k or something like that right now, because we just have like a plain damage to water. Yep, 41, even 42. So that is exactly what you see. The amount of number that you have in that multiplier on that specific element, you will hit that much more on that element. That could be all kinds of damages. It could be ignore defense, that could be crit damages, that could be additional damage artifacts. All of that will actually stack to just give you a pure percentage extra damage on that element. But of course, this counts for all elements. I'm only showing one because it's the same for all elements. Next test we're going to do is damage from water. So still using the same Molongs. And in this case, we're going for minus 21 damage. So we're looking back at the first hit that we're doing. That was like the 37.5. So if we go in with the Molong right now, we should only be doing, how much damage would this be? 29k damage. So that's where you can see that damage reduction from a specific element is a lot of damage reducing. And once again, is also just a plain number of reducing that damage. For the crit damage test, I will be using a Veramos that is on 100 crit rate and then 50 crit damage. The reason that I choose to showcase 50 crit damage is if I add 10% crit damage on 150 crit damage, the increase is not that much. Whereas if I add like a 10% crit damage on a 50, the increase is like 20%. So it's a lot more, and therefore you also noticeably see the differences. So first of all, let's go in without. So if we just S1 right now, we have like critters of 2.6k. We have a little bit of damage fluctuation that is normal. That's around like 5% up and 5% down. But we can see that we're hitting each other for about 2.5 to 2.6s. If we go for skill 2, testing that one out right away as well. Okay, didn't see that one was going too fast. But yeah, we just keep in mind the 2.6Ks for the S1. Okay, adding in this artifact, there's no extra stats added for any damage type except for the crit damage. So if we engrave this one, we should be doing 22% more crit damage. And keep in mind the 2.6s, and now we're hitting each other for, I think it's 2.8s, is that I saw? Yeah, it's 2.8. So this is where you can see that you get like a decent damage increase. And that is simply because of adding crit damage. Keep in mind, adding the crit damage is mostly interesting when your crit damage is already low and your crit rate is very high. So that's definitely something that you want to keep in mind. If you already have like 300 crit damage and you're adding another like 20 crit damage, the increase that you will see is very minimum. This of course also counts for all of the other crit damages in there. So then crit damage first skill. A lot of people are not too sure what this does. Okay, we have this artifact that is crit damage first. So might you ask, what is crit damage first exactly? Well, crit damage first, we're actually going to showcase in 2K. So we currently have 21 crit damage first, and the hits are doing the same as that I was doing with the S1 crit damage that was also at 21. So we're doing about the same damage here. Might you ask, like, okay, is it only the first hit in the battle? No, it's actually every hit in the battle all the time. However, it is counting for multi-hits, where in a multi-hit, only the first hit of that multi-hit will actually do extra damage, and the other hits won't. Let me show you that. For this example, we will take this Lucian, once again, low crit damage to see the difference at a bigger number. And we added in a few extra units just to showcase that it also works on multiple units. So the first hit on all of them should be doing a higher number. So we have 4.9s, 4.8, and 4.8, I think. And then we can see that the crit damage first no longer is activated, and we have 4.3, 4.6, 4.6, and then 1.9. That is how first skill crit damage works. Will we do amputation magic again? We would see the exact same number. So it's not the first skill of the battle, it's just the first hit of an AoE hit or any hit, but it does also count for AoEs as well. So therefore, first skill crit damage is one of the best lines with a unit that doesn't have any multi-hits. So if you go, for example, for the Dragon Knights, Monkey Kings, like all of those kind of units that have a skill 1, 2, or maybe even 1, 2, and 3, that all based on crit damage. First attack crit damage is a lot better than going for a full crit damage skill 2. Of course, it's better to go multiple lines, but we'll talk about that later. Then we're talking about recovery lines. Recovery lines is just simply in the correct skill that you want to recover, you will do extra healing. Testing that out on a Bullfrog that does a plain healing all the time based on 4 stacks. How many do we heal for? We will actually... Wait, why did it not show my healing? We're going to check his healing. He does it as well. So it heals for 14k, so exactly the amount of damage that it's also doing. It is also exactly healing for. So that's also an easy way to check this, for example. Let's add in a recovery 22%. And we will be seeing that we're doing more healing than we actually did damage for. So the damage is going to be that 14k, but my healing is going to be 18k. Because I have that, it's like a plain number increase for that. So therefore recovery on a specific skill is a very strong artifact because it's just a plain upgrade. It's not like adding in a little bit more crit damage. No, it's adding in the full healing times the amount of the artifact that actually gives you. So getting a good triple or quad roll in this is very beneficial. A small note to keep in mind with that. A skill such as Calm Mind that gives a recovery buff does not count for your recovery artifacts. It only counts if the skill actually actively heals at that moment. Another thing to keep in mind with recovery also works on both vampire but also skills that recover by leeching HP as well. For example, Vertical. We have this vampire over here on full vampire. Going in, let's see how much we recover on both the S1 and the S2. S1 we would recover for 1.4. The S2 we recover for 1.1 right now. So if we add in a recovery S1 of 24%, we should be seeing the number of that 1.4 being a lot higher. So in this case, we have recoveries of 1.8. So that could be either the skill itself or the vampire to test that it works for both of them. We're going to test it on the S2 that doesn't have like a built-in life drain, but because of the vampire, it does recover right now. Okay, I noticed my recovery S2 on HP is not that great, so we're going on the defense. However, that does also mean that this vert that I'm hitting right now has 100 extra defense as well. So it would be doing less damage in the first place. So we're doing a 1.25 at the moment. So recovery does work for both the recovery of a skill, but also for life draining from vampire. Next up, we have the accuracy lines. The accuracy lines are a little bit harder to showcase because you always have that 15% resistance check no matter what the accuracy line is. So it would improve, but it's not necessarily saying like, okay, it will work all the time. A thing you have to keep in mind with these three is that these three only work for the specific skill. So let's say we look at Lauren. If we want the skill 1, the slow to land more often, we would have to go skill 1 accuracy. If we want to go for the skill 2 accuracy, we will get more chance for removing beneficial effects and the HP recovery. But if we want to go for a higher chance of pushbacking and for armor breaking, then we have to go skill 3 accuracy. So in this specific unit, I would recommend to max out the accuracy on the unit itself. Whereas if you take the example of Vanessa, Vanessa does have an activation on the S1, but it's a low activation rate, so it matters a little bit less. But you're mainly using it for the S2. So if you want to max this out, maybe you bring it to like 65 accuracy and then throw in like a 20% accuracy S2 to max it out to 8. Next up is attack and defense increasing effect. Rather than saying like, okay, attack buff is 50%, defense buff is 70%. If I add in a 16%, do I get a 66% attack buff? No, not exactly. You get a 16% of that 50. So you would end up with an attack buff that actually gives a 58% of your attack extra. So if you add a bunch of those, you can see the noticeable difference in that. So first of all, let's hit with this Isabel that has an attack buff itself on this Juno, which is just a weak Juno, but just to showcase how much damage do we do. So we have the attack buff in here. Also keep in mind, attack increasing effect only works when you actually have that attack buff. So if you place that on any unit, make sure that it's always either paired with an attack buff booster or that is a self-attack buffer. So we're doing about 17Ks. Keep in mind there is some damage fluctuation, about 5% up and down. So it could be that that was a high hit or a low hit. But we're just gonna see what it works. And now, of course, I struggle to find an artifact that only has attack increasing effect, but not any of the other increasers of damage. So this one is just a slight increase of 9%. So with the damage fluctuation that is there, it might be that we're not seeing too much of an increase. So this is just a 9%, keep that in mind. So we're only adding in the attack buff to become like a 55-ish% rather than a 50%. So we had a 70k and now we do a little bit more than 17k. So this is definitely a upgrade that was a little bit minor. If I would go for like a higher attack increasing effect, it would either increase like the attack or damage on fire. So we see that we get a slight damage increase, but it's not that much. But keep in mind, it's just a 9, it's kind of a low roll. So defense increasing effect is pretty much similar. However, defense buff is 70%. So let's say you have a 10% defense increasing effect. That will make it a 7 extra. So your defense buff will give 77% of your defense extra. Speed increasing effect actually works the same thing. Speed buff is a 30%. If you add in a 10% speed increasing effect, you add in 3% on your speed buff. So your speed buff is going to give 33%. So with that, it's just adding a little bit. Also, a thing I've seen that some people think is like, oh, speed increasing effect. Speed is good, so I just put that on. Once again, make sure that if you're using speed increasing effect, speed up is definitely the one that you want to use on units that either are always placed next to a speed buffer or to a unit that has speed buff by itself. And in most cases, units that have speed scaling, for example, a Leia, for example, a Shimete, for example, well, there's a few other units out there. They highly value from speed up effect as well, because they just get extra damage by having that speed buff in there. Next up is bomb damage. I think that one kind of explains itself, but just to showcase it, bomb damage is also a straight up added number to your damage. So going in without any artifacts, how much damage would this bomb do? We're just looking at the bomb damage. We don't care about any of the other damage. Bomb damage is a close to 13k, 12.9 something. If we add in a bomb damage of 13%, we're not adding any extra tech. Let's see how much damage we do right now. We do a 14%. So we added 13%. I think it's just straight up a number added to your output of your damage bomb. So next one is crit damage taken down. How does that work? If the enemy, for example, has 250 crit damage, you have 10% crit damage taken down. The enemy will crit for 240% crit damage. Doesn't really change that much. However, if you take the numbers, the enemy has a 50 crit damage, then it would only crit for 40. So it's just a slight damage decrease. But if they have a lot of crit rate, for example, a Lucian, it's not really going to take down. So if we once again take that Veromos example, current state 50 crit damage, no artifacts added at the moment. We are still critting each other for 2.7k, more or less around that point. 2.6 to 2.7s. So in this case, we just add in the HP so we don't add extra defense to lower our damage in the first place. So just the minus this. We have a slightly bit damage increase from here, but I think that is not too much that it would actually show too much. So in this case, we should be doing quite some less damage because we're actually reducing a 50 crit damage to a lower number. So we're seeing like 2.4s. So that is actually a pretty big damage decrease for that 13 crit damage taken down. However, if this unit was actually on super high crit damage, then it wouldn't really change that much. So it's something that's kind of niche, but it's not really super great or anything. Next up, we have Life Drain. Life Drain is pretty much just simply amplifying anything that vampires or life drains in a specific skill itself. So in this case, the Vampire S1 recovers HP. If we add Life Drain to it, it will add more Life Drain. Let's see how that works. This means we would Life Drain for about 1,000 per hit. Is that 1,000? Yeah, we're life draining like 1100, adding in a life drain of 30%. We do have a little bit crit damage more as well, so we would do slightly bit more damage, so keep that in mind. And then we would life drain for 1400. So that's just a plain added number of life draining that much more. Sounds pretty strong. You could think about like, okay, that is very impactful. However, if you just add more damage artifacts, you could also life drain more because you actually do more damage. But it's not too bad on sidelines. However, this also works for vampire runes itself. So we have a vampire on full vampire without any artifacts. How much would we life drain in this case on a skill 2? Because we do know that the skill 2 doesn't normally not life drain. If we life drain right now, we can see that we're life draining for 1.1. 1.1 and then a little bit high. If we once again add in that life drain artifact and we go for a skill 2, we should be healing for 1.5s and 1.6s. So it does also work with Vampire itself. However, as mentioned, the line is not that interesting because you could also just simply add more damage by artifacts and therefore you would do more life draining in the first place. Next up, we have the most interesting lines, which are the additional damage by HP, attack, defense, and speed. I'm only going to show it for HP and how it works, but it works for all of them. And keep in mind, it's pretty useful to have an Excel sheet like this to kind of calculate how much extra damage each hit would do based on like how much stats your current unit has, because it might be that attack or defense might be more interesting, but in most cases it's kind of like HP, speed being the high values, attack being a high value, and defense a little bit less. Also, one thing to keep in mind, if you're playing an RTA, attack goes up over time, so additional damage proportion to attack will go up during the match as well. Whereas your HP goes down, and then also the additional damage proportion to HP will go down as well. So for this test, we once take again a Verdi-heal, but we added the Verdi-heal with a lot of HP. We have no attack and no crit rate, crit damage, so this Verdi-heal should do a little damage. And therefore, we can also show that the additional damage by stats are actually an ignore defense. So if we hit this right now, we're literally hitting like 1,000 to each other, which is near to nothing. If we add in this artifact that only has defense, so we're not adding in any extra attack, but just 1.1% for additional damage on HP, we can see that we greatly increase the damage. Now, I'm not entirely sure if the last time we did 1.1s on critters or it was non-critters, but you can see that the damage is increased. So what is mainly useful for those additional damage artifacts is where you want to have multi-hitters. Multi-hitters or units where you don't always hit on armor breaks, because when there's armor breaks, most of the time, if you have some crit rate, a crit damage artifact would do more damage. However, if there's no armor break, then definitely a additional damage artifact by HP, speed, or attack, or anything like that would add in more damage than just going for crit damages. You might ask, like, okay, what is the best for a specific unit? Well, using an Excel sheet like this, you can mostly figure out that something of combination lines is what's strongest. So you have like one roll in this, two rolls in this, and then the other two stats are like that as well. It's probably better than just triple rolls into speed if the unit is based on speed, for example. Another thing to keep in mind is that if a unit has attack buff, that this is also amplified by that 50% of that attack buff. Or if a unit has speed buff, that the speed increasing effect, for example with Juno, is a lot higher value than that of a unit that doesn't have a speed buff. Another thing to keep in mind, if you often face Leos, Leos would make this to 100 speed. Therefore, this additional damage by speed will be lowered quite some as well, because you will base it off 100 speed rather than normally like your 200 or 300 speed that you have. Next up, we have a CD as the enemy HP is more. So I just call it CD more. What does this mean? Well, you can actually check it like a gouge going like this. If the enemy is at 100% HP, you will get the full crit damage that you have over here. Would the enemy be at a 50% HP, you will get half of this. And that kind of goes both ways to how much crit damage you have. Best showcased on the Lucian with amputation magic. Once again, using the same Lucian low crit damage to see the damage difference in that. I actually had to change out the units because the units I was hitting actually had a lot of HP, and therefore I wasn't doing too much damage, and therefore you didn't see the damage drop for my crit damage getting less from crit damage more. So if we hit those, we can actually see that we have still some damage fluctuation, where we can see that the second hit is actually higher than the first. But on average, we can see that the damage is going down. You have the damage fluctuation of 5% where it still goes up and down 5%, which is probably more than the crit damage that I'm actually having. And we can see that we're actually not full killing those units, but we can see on average that the damage is going down. But this Lucian is just kind of weak. So for that reason, I changed it up. I gave him attack artifacts and then more crit damage max. And here we should see bigger differences because I would actually do more damage to them. Yeah, we can kind of see still like the last number is not always the lowest. You can still over time see it getting lower and lower. Then we have crit damage less, which works the same way, but the other way around. So at a 0%, HP of the enemy, I would get 40%. If the monster is fully at 100% HP, I would get 0%. So let's add in 86% crit damage less on this case. And we will see that the first hit does less damage and the later hits will start to do more and more damage. Here you can definitely see that where pretty much with all of them, you can actually see that pretty well, that over time you start doing more and more damage. So for that reason, crit damage more is definitely used on those units which just go for like a first turn snipe. For example, a Poseidon, a Zyros, a Grogan, all of those kind of units. However, crit damage less is more used for units that either have a multi-hit and would drag it more down, like a Lucian, it kind of works. In Lucian, it's still kind of like, okay, do you want to go for crit damage less or do you rather just go for other stats? But crit damage less is definitely good for those units. Like if you have a dungeon team, a unit always moves at the end. Crit damage less is definitely the way to go. For example, for a Bale, it's very strong. Or for units that are more likely to move after the whole team in your kind of cleave scenario, then crit damage less is very interesting. Next up, we have own turn, one target CD, and it's exactly as it says. It only works on your own turn, so it doesn't work if you're revenging, and it only works on single target hits. So, for example, if we were to AoE right now, The AoE is not going to add any extra damage or anything. It's just going to be exactly the same for the whole thing. However, if we were to go for S1s, the S1 damage will be increased by the amount of crit rate that you have. But that's only just for the S1. Then as final, we have the counter and co-op damage. Well, pretty much straightforward as well. Counter is just adding in a straight amount of number of how much extra damage you would do based on that counter. The counter works both for units that are either on revenge or have a building counter such as a Douglas. So in this case, going in with a Veramos just to see the counter hits. I think it should be doing 2.1s. We have seen it before. Okay, there we have a counter hit. Counter hit was doing about 1.9. So I think it's 1.9 to 2 point something. I think that was one of the lower hits. Adding in one that has a 14% of that. It has a little bit of crit damage less, but it shouldn't change too much. Okay, we have counter over here, and the counter was doing 2.2. So that's just a straight on extra damage of that 14%. And that is the same for co-ops as well. So then we have a few lines that are actually removed from the game. Speed from lost HP, attack from lost HP, and defense from lost HP. How they work is similar for crit damage low. The lower HP you have, the more speed you will get. So what does that mean? Let's say I'm at 0% HP, I will get 93% of my base. This one actually works for base rather than the total. Extra speed. So in this case, that would be for a Gildong, 93% of 104. Of course, you're not going to be at 0% HP, but let's say at 50, you will get a 50% of that 93% of that 104. Testing that against the Molong. This Molong is actually faster than me by 106. And this Gildong is a 93. So the Molong should move in front of me. However, if he goes for the Reckless Assault, afterwards I would start lapping him. So let's see how that works. Staying Molong. Okay, we got a Reckless Assault here. It was actually the second turn. So he lapped me. So in this case, I should be start lapping him. As you can see over here, I was slower before, but suddenly I got faster because I'm on that low HP. Definitely an artifact line that I'm not sure why they removed it, because it was very strong on those healers such as Lulus, Raccoonis, and any of those kind of units that actually want to get high speed the moment that they're lower HP to get those healings in. Or the other way around for attack from low HP, for example a Samath that comes back with a little HP and then does a lot of damage. But I also think that those were slightly too confusing and therefore people didn't really use them. The biggest issue, however, is you can't find them anymore because they remove all of the lines that are no longer findable in the game, but if you still had them, they are still there. So unfortunately, you can't really find them and therefore it's going to be super difficult to check those out. There's two more lines, but that one is even more rare because it was removed in the first iteration and the other one is just kind of useless, which is recovery of HP or attack bar on revive. That one is kind of useless. It's very niche, like it only works for, I would say the attack bar increase is only good for a Beelzebub and that is about it, which is the Dark Demon. The recovery on revive is not that interesting as well, so I definitely do understand that these lines are removed. However, there's one line that is removed, which I definitely do think is very strong. And that line is speed with inability effects. That one is written really lazy, but what this means is that you get speed the moment that you are stunned. So it's kind of useful in units like Avert or units that don't have their passive working the moment that they're stunned. Could be an Artemis, could be a bunch of things. Once again, it works from the base speed rather than the total speed, but I don't think it's a bad line. It was just a line that a lot of people didn't really understand and therefore was removed. I also just checked there was also a Reflect one. I think the Reflect one was not bad, but it was just good on probably just a Ragdoll with a maybe and an Alexandra mainly. And the extra hit on Crushing Hit, but I think they removed Crushing Hit altogether, so I'm not too sure if that's actually there. And that is everything for the artifact lines. However, there's one more thing that people might ask, and I want to clarify, and that is if the crit damage lines actually do stack. There was this come to a support ticket that actually said that only the highest crit damage line does actually work and all of the others don't stack on top of that. That part is not true. Let me show you why. So 22% just defense in there. Let's see how much we do on S1s on these Veramos that we have seen before. We are throwing Hadokens for about 2.7 to 2.8 is what it seems. 2.6.5 if it's a low case. Then, if that is true, then this artifact should do a lot less damage because we're looking at a 17 over here. It is less than the 22% on the other side. However, we also have the crit damage low, which is a little bit harder to test for this. But I didn't have too good of an example for this, so let's just go in with this one because it's a fair trade on like having the same amount of defense. Let's see how much we should do. A little bit less damage, but we shouldn't do that much less. So 2.6s. The moment we get towards a low HP, we actually should be starting to see more damage as well still. So we have still close to 2.8. So we see it's nearly the same amount of damage, whereas we should be having a lot less damage. simply because it wouldn't be stacking. But we can definitely see that we're doing near the same amount of damage of something that was 22. The moment that the HP goes lower, we started adding in more damage. So for that reason, we can see that the artifact lines do stack, because the 22% of low should never be higher if that's the only line that should be working at some point. That should be already pretty much the same as that S1 crit damage that we had on the previous one. Well, we do see that the damage is actually going up, and therefore we can 100% guarantee that a combination line of crit damage does work. And that is also the main thing, like that's my last take on all of these artifacts lines. Look for artifact lines where multiple lines are useful. Don't go for one high triple roll in one thing and then all 3 other useless lines. Try to find artifacts that have good lines in multiple things. That's all there is to it for this whole artifact guide. Guys, thanks a lot for watching. If you appreciate this video, definitely hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and see you as always in the next one.